good afternoon and greetings from Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth, the events coordinator for Gibson's Bookstore in Concord, New Hampshire. I am very pleased to have with us today S.A. Chakraborty and VE Schwab. They are joining us today to discuss Shannon's newest book, just released this week, The Empire of Gold, which I will take this moment to mention Gibson's has signed copies available for purchase. So if you are interested in a signed copy, we have them. We're happy to ship them out to you. We do ship internationally, although we'll have to contact you about an international shipping price quote. But please join me today. I suppose this is put your hands together virtually for VE Schwab joining us in conversation to celebrate S.A. Chakraborty. Ladies, hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So let's get started about Empire of Gold. Do you have anything that you want to start out with saying first?
Me?
Tell us about your book, how excited you are about, how was launch week? Let's start with that.
Launch week was great. You know, I've had a lot of conflicting emotions, but I mostly just feel very satisfied and content. The Daevabad Trilogy like nearly broke me, the actual writing process of it, and suddenly being like, oh, I have this new full-time job now and deadlines and this massive book that I've never written books before. And I'm just very like satisfied and proud that I pulled it off, and that I wrote a book I was really proud of, and that was personal, and that I was able to dive into a lot of things that meant a lot to me. And to deliver an ending that felt both wholesome and bittersweet and hopeful in a way I didn't think I would have arrived at. So I feel very content in that. I feel sad to move on and leave the characters and all the scenes, you know, you think about and then you'll never write. But I'm happy. I'm just like, I'm enjoying talking to everybody and speaking with all these great writers and talking about things with fans. And it's just like a great way to kind of cap off the trilogy and then move on to something fresh.
Shannon, I'm dying to know, like, because I'm so fascinated by, you know, trilogies and having written one, and it's such a weird emotional roller coaster that you go through. But I'm curious from a process perspective, like, did you know how you wanted it to end?
I had a very different ending in mind, actually. And, you know, it's a little strange because when I first started writing this, I didn't really mean to write a book. The City of Brass was the first book I ever wrote. And it was like in my own head, personal project, I had this grand arc, but I didn't think I was going to sell one book, let alone be allowed to write 3 books. And I had, I think, in many ways, a more what I thought epic fantasy was supposed to be ending in mind, which was just lots of carnage and everything being bleak and grim. And as I kind of developed the story further and how I quite frankly, as I thought more about my craft and about sort of the messages and politics I was discussing, the era that we're living in, I wanted to craft something that felt hopeful, that kind of offered up the world may be bleak, but there's still goodness, and there is use in fighting sometimes when you don't think things are going to get better. So I definitely changed the ending to better correspond with that.
I love that. I love that. What do you feel like was one book harder than the other? Like, because this is the weird thing is like a second book is a bridge between 1 and 3, but it has to do its own thing and you never want to repeat. And each book becomes its kind of its own adventure.
Oddly enough,
but
book 2 was definitely the hardest to write. I mean, really? I had the complete book 2 breakdown mentally and physically and being like, what do you mean I'm an author now and I have to turn this book in? Like, I'm sorry, like I have a 3-year-old, this is just not working out. And it was all of a sudden the concept of writing to an audience, to people were going to buy this, and people already had opinions on the first book because I wrote most of the second book after the first book was already out, which don't do if you're writing a trilogy. So that one was really hard. And then I started book 3 with very little concrete idea of where I was going or how I was going to get there, versus book 2, which sort of went along the beats I had planned. And oddly enough, I found that more freeing. And I felt more confident, and just that was not the awful process that was writing The Kingdom of Copper. And I took a lot of solace in that as I moved on, because as I'm writing my second book, I was like, I don't want to do this for my livelihood. Like, this is awful. And then you knock that one out, you knock another one out, and you're like, oh, okay, like I actually get enjoyment out of this.
Yeah, definitely.
On that note, do you want to talk a little bit about writing during a pandemic?
What's writing during a pandemic? No, I mean, I was supposed to be working on my new book, but I lived in one of the first hotspots, and my husband's doctor and my daughter's school closed. So I've been just trying, and I've been saying the same thing to other writer friends, to just kind of put my family and my mental health and surviving this all first. So I kind of revamped my writing schedule, and I actually ended up writing a lot of extra scenes from the Daevabad Trilogy, and sort of like fanfic of my own work, just because I wanted to be getting words down. I was sitting at 4 a.m. in the morning and sobbing on my computer, unable to work on a new project. So I kind of feel like that was an extended goodbye, and sort of probably good for my creative output or just my minds. And now I'm trying to go back into the other project a bit more.
Are we ever going to see those?
Yeah, they're up on my website.
So
How you've been working and writing during the pandemic?
I mean, I'm in France right now because my parents live here, and I came down from Scotland, where I was planning on having the only 2 months of my year that I had to sit still and write, ironically. And I came down to France, and that was like 4 months ago. So, I mean, it's a lot. It's challenging being with family, mostly because I love my family, but I'm somebody who regresses to like their teenage self when you put them with their parents. And now I live at home with like 7 pets. And I mean, I'm trying. Weirdly, I have had no focus for things I'm supposed to be doing. So I've been really good at writing things that I'm not supposed to be doing. And I feel like I'm going to just take it as a win, because it feels like any creative progress made during this period is all bonus.
So let's talk a little bit. I have a couple questions here, Shannon, and we do have a whole bunch of audience questions that we will, if you guys have them, go ahead and type them in and put them in the Q&A, so we will get to them. This series has a lot of people reorienting their belief in faith, different kinds of faith. There's faith in people that they believed in. There's faith in organizations and institutions. There's faith in symbols and faith in religion itself. Their journeys through faith caused some large changes for your characters and their world. Would you like to touch on writing about faith?
Yeah, I mean, and even sort of that entire question. This is not just for fictional characters, but I'm a big believer that sort of malleability and the ability to take in new information and internalize that and think about the world in a different way is a very good trait to have, and probably something everybody could do better with, of, just it being okay to kind of sometimes question yourself and your community and your beliefs, and without letting that completely disrupt things or have that blow up in a way that you sink into your own entrenched biases. So I think that's a good thing to show fictional people doing, so that maybe then all of us can start doing it a bit more. And in terms of writing about faith, that I love writing about faith and writing about faith, because I think when you're doing world building, especially if you're setting something in a human-esque world, religion, quite frankly, whether or not people like it, don't like it, it has a huge part in human society. It's the reason we orient the days that we have, and we have the holidays we do. I always feel like I get called on doing religion and world building workshops during December, which is a great time for me to be like, yes, we live in a secular society. Just walk out the door and tell me how secular this society is. And that's okay. I mean, or not okay. I mean, that's a whole other question, but it's an incredibly important part of human society. And I feel like to ignore that, ignore beliefs and superstitions and orthodoxy, does a disservice when you're looking at a world and sort of enriching this. And even just talking about personality, this is a great way to dig into your characters of, are they religious? Are they not religious? What does this say about their own internal, their journey or whatever, and just how does it work for their community? How does it work with family dynamics? It's one of those aspects of life that really kind of touch everything in a way you don't see. Another thing I love writing about just in general is sort of sort of the confluence and change of faith. I've always found it very fascinating, the history of religion and how we go from the way faiths change, the way they clash and converge and change and adapt. I think it's fascinating. Actually, I'm going to slightly divert. I'm reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue right now and loving it. And everything that touches on like the old gods and the world that was before sort of this rise of monotheism, I think is fascinating. I love looking at the aspects of what existed before and how we've built on them, how we've changed them to the point where some of this has gotten absorbed, some of it has gotten completely forgotten. And I think it's fascinating to look at that change in culture and history, both from a fictional side and even just a personal side. I've always found it, I myself, I'm a practicing Muslim who's interested in the history of religion and specifically like a lot of the pre-Islamic era. And I've been asked before, like, do you find trouble, making peace between the two? And yes, sometimes. And I think there's an odd sort of peace and grace to make with that. And it says a lot about humanity and pluralism. And I like diving into all that stuff in my books.
Yeah, I'm a pagan, and it's really interesting to look at like the way polytheism becomes monotheism historically, and the way like the borrowing culture, the sense of like how polytheism predates a lot of like its monotheistic antecedents, and like how it gets incorporated. I studied a lot of it in college, and I'm always fascinated by the sense of co-opting that can happen that then translates into subjugation and empowerment by a new religion. And so it's something that I look at in all of my books, and that I look for in books specifically. If you're designing a fantasy world and you're not in your power dynamics, not also considering the higher powers that you're setting in your worlds. In Shades of Magic, magic is a god form. And so it's something I always look for when I'm reading fantasy as well as writing it. Like, how are you addressing the sense of, do they pray and what do they pray to? Because that so incorporates into what they love, respect, and fear, and what their guiding principles are for their society. Like, it's such an important component.
When, this is not a spoiler, guys. Ali, your character, Ali, pulls a lot of strength from his faith. And that's not something that you see a lot in current fiction. And it's really nice to see a character who pulls great strength from it, and he uses it to do good, and it does not become the big baddie in the series. And I'm trying to phrase very carefully so as not to give spoilers. You can see the power that is gained and lost as I don't know how to say this. You know what I'm talking about.
I don't actually.
As religions change. I should probably just change the subject because I can't think of it. You guys will know what I mean when you get to these parts of the book. So do you have a favorite character? Do you have a favorite character, and then do you have a favorite character to write? Because those are two different questions.
I mean, yes, I think I have a hard time picking because I love writing them all. I mean, I love writing side characters, but if I had to pick only one character, it would definitely be Nahri. I just wanted to write this very complicated, messy, ambitious woman who was just trying to survive and find her way. And I put a lot of my own insecurities and doubts into writing her. And I really like writing her, and she's easily my favorite. I don't have a favorite to write. I like writing them all. It's like a fun little trip to take a journey into different people's heads and explore the different ways that they would negotiate the world, and what that says about not just their fictional arc, but even how you write them, the actual mechanics of prose and diving into this stuff. So I just like to write a lot of different characters.
Was there a character that's the most difficult to write?
Yes, I will say writing Dara was easily the most difficult, and I wasn't originally going to write him when I started the second book. I wrote an entire second book without him and with somebody else that then had to be completely rewritten in like 4 months. And I kind of was like on my high creator horse of saying he's the most powerful, but he's also a pawn. So it's symbolism that he doesn't get to have a voice. And both my agent and my editor was like, that's nice. You created a fascinating character. Get inside his head. That's what your readers want. And first, I didn't know. And then once I started writing him, it was both difficult because a lot of times with his character, I was trying to show how somebody you would want to root for, because at the heart you think this is a good man, this is a hero, they're charismatic, they're kind, they're good to their family, they're good to the people they love, has also committed horrible, horrible crimes. And it was very important for me to never justify that in the text, to show his story, but make it clear in a way that I, as the author and in the world, that was not okay. And writing that was definitely a challenge. And especially in the third book, it went to some really grim places. And I try to write, when I write violence in fiction, I try to be very deliberate in how I handle it and respectful, because I think there's a little bit too much of an emphasis, especially in epic fantasy sometimes, to just show carnage and bloodbaths, and it does it in a way that I feel sometimes cheapens life and cheapens the type of lives that are usually lost in political struggles. And I didn't want to do that. And in not doing that, and in trying to really dive into the horror and make sure it wasn't just this sort of bloody window dressing, it was very hard to write some of those scenes and get into them.
It was hard to read some of them. One of the things that I appreciate about your books very much is how realistic they are. I mean, setting aside that it's djinn fantasy, and politics, and there's winged lions, and setting aside that, that the heroes are struggling, and they do have strong internal conflicts, and that the things that happen to them, there is no deus ex machina. There's nobody coming to save them. They're making very difficult choices, and people are getting hurt. And it is hard because you want it to be like everything's okay at the end, and it's not. And people do get hurt, and it's hard to read, because sometimes you want like that escape, but then you read it and you're like, no, that was how that would have gone if there were a winged lion and a djinn court politics. Victoria, do you want to talk about writing violence?
I was just sitting here thinking like, oh God, I write a lot of violence. But it's interesting because I similarly, like, I have said before, I don't like killing characters, because once you kill them, they can't suffer anymore. And so the arc is like done. Like because the thing is, I'm actually a really big believer in the hopeful ending or the happy ending. I just want to make my characters work for it really, really hard. So I do actually try to be mindful of not being violent for violence's sake, while also keeping an eye towards who is the recipient of the violence and who is the perpetrator of that violence. I'm actually somebody who, in my books, especially my more recent ones, it's not that I make them less violent, it's that I look at who gets to have the agency of the violence. So I look at like Lila Bard in Shades of Magic, who's essentially written with all the trappings of a male anti-hero, and then made female for the purposes of the book. And it was really interesting to see the way people responded to her compared to others. And then I look at like Marcella Riggins in Vengeful, who's somebody who basically says, how many men will I have to turn to dust before one takes me seriously? And she's given this immense power, and she essentially becomes the avatar of violence against microaggressors. She's just so fed up with everything. So I've tried to look at who I get to use power, whose hands I get to put it in. And sometimes, yeah, that is violence, because I'm writing worlds in which there are violent stakes. But Addie's a really interesting one, because Addie has violence acted upon her in the form of a curse to be forgotten. And then she retaliates by finding ways to carve a mark into the world without the glory, but with just as much of the meaning. So yeah, I mean, I think violence is never meant to be gratuitous, but it is another aspect of power and of agency and of control. And so I think it's important when you do use violence to look at who's the perpetrator and who's the recipient.
That's actually something that I do talk about when I talk about Shannon's books, is that Nari is a woman in a specific time period in specific cultural background, and she does not have a tremendous amount of power, except she does. And she has learned to wield the limited power that she has. And I very much enjoy reading that, because it feels very realistic that this is the power that she has, and she doesn't have a tremendous amount of it, and she uses it to change the world in the way that she can. And it feels very realistic while you're looking at the things that the characters are going through. So
it's interesting though, I don't know, Shannon, if you've seen this at all in terms of feedback, but the expected cost for giving female characters power is astonishing. The expected punishment. I have never written a female character and given them power, violence, or agency without readers essentially expecting them to like meet a downfall because of it, or be punished in some way in the narrative because of it. Like they expect consequence for female power.
I had feedback for the first book to the point it was actually a turning point in me making sure I didn't go on Goodreads and get this kind of feedback. I think it was about both the way people view female characters in fantasy, and quite frankly, I felt the way people were pushing some stereotypes onto the culture and faith I was writing about, of there wasn't enough sexual violence in the book, or perpetrated against her, or other people saying it was everywhere when it wasn't, because I hadn't written it. And it was like this expectation that if she was a woman in this world, at some point she was going to be assaulted in that form. And it was one of those things that just like has stuck in my craw, and I'm not really even sure how to talk about it publicly in a way that doesn't make me rage. But I just think it says a lot about what we expect of female characters in our own genre, that it's not realistic, or it doesn't touch upon this thing that must happen to women, that we don't have them assaulted. It was a little demoralizing.
I should be surprised. And it is surprising that I'm not surprised by that. That's okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
But I think it's even more important then that we operate with that self-awareness and an understanding of the narrative control and power we have to redictate those norms and redictate and say like, no, you actually can have an amazing story with a powerful female character that doesn't hinge upon assault or abuse. Like that, there are more manifestations, more origin stories for female strength than as the victim.
Absolutely.
I think there's an award for thrillers out there specifically given to the best thriller in which there are no crimes against women. And that there has to be that award out there says a lot.
Yeah. And even the fact that it kind of normalizes it. I mean, I've seen this in historical fantasy, that if that's what was expected to be in the books, then when you have things come up, they say, oh, that was realistic. Everybody was raped back then. And I'm telling you, it wasn't. Life was not this absolute grim mirror of sexual assault from the time you were born to the time you were buried for women throughout history. I think that says a lot about how we view the past. And I think even in writing, I've tried to, you can find pragmatic stories of women throughout history without it, you're just sort of devolving into it must have been a misery for them. Women are very good. We've had to be at finding ways to pull together a positivity and a life with some light, even when you're given very bad circumstances.
It's also purely an indicator of who's narrating these stories. I mean, like, this is the thing, right? Like, it's telling that the erasure of those identities, that the erasure of those perspectives is not the same as an erasure of their existence. What's happening is that specific people are being given the pen over and over and over again to dictate what those norms are.
There's a lot of comments in the chat right now that says life wasn't Game of Thrones.
No, it wasn't. It really wasn't.
So I have had a couple questions pop up here from attendees asking about your writing process for writing different points points of view. Some people said, do you have different playlists for the characters? Did you write their character like all chronologically start to finish and then switch to a different point of view? Or did you bounce back and forth? And your extra scenes show the perspectives of multiple side characters, but the main books focus on Ali, Nari, and Dara. How did you decide which characters to give a voice to? And do you wish you could have added more perspectives?
I mean, if I was just writing it for myself, there would have been a dozen different character points of views, and the book would have been 1,000 pages long, which I don't think my publisher would have bought the books if they were like that. You know, I think it's kind of like, I like to dive into them personally because I find it a creative exercise. I find it just enjoyable to open up this world that I spent 10 years creating. So that's a very different perspective from what I'm putting out there in this published story. Once I was pulling the trilogy together, I first very much felt like it was Ali and Nahri's story. It was Nahri's story first, then Ali's, and then Dara's. And when I started writing his point of view, I felt like he grew more important. So I wrote them. I don't know that I had like a specific way of going about like, oh, I'll only write this character for 3 weeks, or I'll skip around. To be quite frank, these 3 books that I have out are the only books I've ever written. So I'm still kind of, finding out what works for me and trying to be open to finding my own path, and rather than being like, this is what, the manual for writers said, do 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm trying to kind of find what works for me to get words down on the page. So I, especially if people are asking this and are writers, I very much recommend that perspective. I think everybody has their own way of writing, whether you're a pantser, you're a plotter, or a gardener, or whatever the terms we throw around. You do what works for you to get words down.
Are you a pantser or a plotter?
I'm absolutely a pantser, and I hate it. I hate it. No, you don't understand. I am surrounded by like 10 to-do lists right now. I am an organizer and a scheduler, and it comes to writing stories, and I am just like, nothing. I like to know my world and my characters and then throw them into situations and follow that to see how they would respond, which I'm finding is a problem when you move to a new trilogy and you know neither the world nor the characters, but you have some plot idea. You just are like, who are these strangers? Like, what would they do right now? I don't know.
There's a question here. Both Shannon and Victoria have written sympathetic villains with point of view chapters, sticking with our point of view question theme here, who are also quite similar to each other, as in Dara and Holland. What drew each of you to explore the story through their villains' eyes?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm the exact opposite. I am a rigid planner, and I know the ending of my series before I start the first book. So with that in mind, I know, well, that's why I host an interview series called No Right Way for this exact reason, right? This concept that there's no right way to write, only whatever works for you. But what I will say is I like undercutting my readers' expectations or judgment of a character. And what that means is in every series, I like to pick one character and I like to start them as a villain, transition them to an antagonist, and then end with them as a protagonist. So that like you are only able to see them as the villain if you don't really know anything about them. And then as you get to know more about them, you enter that moral gray zone. And so for me, I always knew that Holland was going to become my moral gray protagonist, somebody that you became more sympathetic of. Also, I think that we as readers relate to the weaknesses in characters, not the strengths. We never look at a character and we're like, that character's so badass, I feel like that character. We're like, that character really messed up or was selfish or did something. I get that. I think relatability actually comes from characters' weaknesses.
I absolutely agree. And I think even especially some of the things I was working with in the story in terms of politics and history, I very much wanted to show that most villains in the world don't think of themselves as that way. I don't think, it's very few people, I will oppress the minorities in my city. They buy into this system of social oppression that is usually exists before they were even born, and it's something you're brought up into, and all of the things that you can swallow and believe. It's, you know, it's the kind of trade-offs that we're seeing even today of, oh, like, we need security, like, will you trade, you know, certain freedoms, or like, we'd all be safer if, you know, just let that particular group suffer. It's fine. We're doing, like, that's, to me, is unfortunately human history. And I think exploring the different ways people opt in or opt out of that, because in the moment, I think most people like to think I would be a hero. When in reality, a lot of times it's easier to sort of go along with what your family and your community and your society is telling you, or to go along with something where you didn't even know you're going along with doing this evil. And I wanted to show that a bit with the characters, and show that breaking down some of that stuff is hard. And that you saw sort of a progression in the books of seeing how different people responded to these pressures. Some grew into tyranny. Some people went the exact way. But I wanted it to seem hard, and for nobody to really be an easy villain. That you could still have people, villains who were morally gray, but you could see the choices they had been given and see sort of how this happened to them.
What's the quote? Nobody's a villain in their own mind. The villain is the hero in their own story.
Everyone is the hero of their own story.
Absolutely.
So I have a question here about eye color. How did you pick the eye colors of the tribes and their family and tribe colors? And were there any historical influences you drew from for either?
I picked this so long ago that I feel like I probably had reasons at once that now I can't really remember. It was mostly just the idea. I liked playing with metals. You know, you think of fire and blacksmithing, and I wanted to play with this idea of them having, you know, different types of metallic toned eyes. I just thought that was kind of cool. Sometimes you don't have other reasons.
Let's see, I lost my question here. Your trilogy touches on so many issues: violence, religion, classism, xenophobia, family. Did you set out to touch on all of these, or did the story naturally take you to each? That question comes from Sarah.
I think it kind of naturally went in this way, just because, like I said, I was kind of writing this outside the zone of even understanding, you know, what publishing was or what themes and everything. You know, it's the joke of the writer writes a room that is blue, and everyone is like, the room is blue because of, like, they were suffering like sadness and depression, and the writer's like, the room is just blue. You know, I was just trying to write something that felt real and natural and spoke to the world we exist in, and sort of the world and the themes that I was playing with. And I think, I don't know, maybe just in trying to write something that felt real to history and to our own society, I pulled in the themes that unfortunately mar our society. So I think it was one of those, and it wasn't really until the third book that I was kind of thinking about, you know, messaging and that kind of thing.
Victoria, question for you. If Lila and Kel went to Daevabad, what do you think would happen?
Oh, I mean, anywhere Lila goes, bodies say follow. I mean, that's the thing, right? The good news is that Kel is kind of a balancing force. Like, I wouldn't want either one of them to go into Shannon's trilogy alone. But I feel like together, I mean, the problem is Lila's also most likely to, like, she's problematic in that she loves power and tends to try and take it. I mean, there's a reason that she's able to enter Red London and kind of dominate really quickly. Like, she's the definition of an insider. Kel's the definition of an outsider. She's somebody who can enter an environment and assimilate and then, like, also dominate it. So I'm not sure I would ever want her to go into anybody else's fantasy worlds, because I think that she would never be a force for good. She's a force for self-interest. So,
and I feel like whenever I get crossover questions, I'm like, please don't put your humans in my world. My world is awful.
I don't want anyone to be in White London. Like, I don't ask these things, but yeah, I think it's good to keep Kel and Lila out on a ship somewhere far away from people and away from any harm.
We have a question here. Could you please both talk about how and why you have chosen your pen names? Somehow, all my favorite writers have names from which I weren't able to guess that they are women, and it was so great to find out that they are. Both of you, R.F. Huang, N.K. Jemison, S.L. Huang. Was this a conscious choice? Were you advised to do this by your publisher?
Well, I started a little before Shannon, so I can't speak for you. Yeah, I mean, it's a super, super sexist industry. You're not like, there's a reason that the vast majority of people who go by gender neutral pseudonyms or gender ambiguous pseudonyms are women or queer femme or people who are not like assigned male at birth. And the reason is because like, the number of people who've told me that they're so glad they didn't know I was a woman or they would have never picked up my books is astonishing to me. Astonishing. So it was something early on my editor actually didn't want me to do because she was like, screw them all. But I am somebody who would rather win from the inside out. There's a line in Shades of Magic where it's about how battles are fought from the outside in, but wars are won from the inside out. And I think that I'd rather somebody read my book and then need to deal with whatever their notions are than never pick up my book in the first place because I'm a woman. So yeah, like it was very conscious.
Mine was both conscious and very fast. I went from I'm never going to sell a book, I'm never going to sell a book, I'm never going to sell a book, and quite frankly not really knowing much about publishing to all of the sudden, oh, your trilogy just sold at auction. And I kind of panicked, to be honest. I was very concerned about my privacy. I mean, you want to talk about being a woman in writing. I had my own situation that I was trying to kind of, like, just put it in the way people can be scary. And that I was very conscious and concerned as I went forward of being suddenly like into the public, and I didn't want people to be able to find me, which is very naive of me now because they can track you down anyway. So I was both trying to protect my privacy, and it was like I kind of almost unconsciously bought into these assumptions because people were saying it. It's better to go by your initials. It's better to go by your initials. Then, people will think you're a man. And I did it basically because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. And ironically enough, now I wish I could have spoken to myself a couple years ago and been like, it's okay to sometimes not do that because you think that's what you're supposed to do. I don't know that I would make the same decision. I think I still have my concerns about privacy, but it almost doesn't matter because anybody can track you down on the internet. But it just, it says a lot about what the atmosphere was that I think I was just like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do in order to be accepted into epic fantasy.
There's a couple comments in the chat that mention that women who write fantasy often get shelved in YA. Have you guys been shelved in YA?
Absolutely.
I write YA, so like this is the thing, like I take no insult at that. Like I write YA too, but the assumption that anything I write is YA now is maddening.
Yeah, it was the same thing. I think when my first book came out, it was more often assumed to be YA than adult, to the point where I was correcting more often that no, I wasn't a YA author. I was writing adult. And I think there's space to be found in sort of this crossover field. I think my books, especially City of Brass, works in that. And I always feel conflicted when I answer this question because I love my YA fans. Like oftentimes they're the most passionate and just like there's something magical about capturing readers when they're younger. So I love that, but I do think it sends a certain message. Like my next series is about middle-aged retired pirates, and already, I mean, that's the description. And already people are like the YA author, the YA author, the YA author. I'm like, it's not. like if I don't believe in a lot of rules for audience and genre, except middle-aged retired pirates is not a young adult audience. I mean, I think you can read it. You can read whatever you want. But if we're looking in what publishing says is markets and audience, that ain't it.
Yeah. I was going to ask at the end I guess we'll put a pin in that and come back to what your next projects are at the end here. But guys, remember this, middle-aged retired pirates. So we have a question here. Shannon, your fight scenes are so emotional and suspenseful. How do you write them? And Victoria, same question for you. How do you guys write fight scenes?
I kind of I always wanted like the fight scenes to feel can't even talk. This is how you know I'm like on like the latter part of the book. I wanted them to feel visual or seem visual. But a lot of times, fight scenes are awesome because they're full of tension and they're great to have, character moments and all it, have a lot of great discussions and fallouts. So a lot of times I will write the dialogue and okay, besides all the physical stuff, this is what I want this scene to accomplish. And I'll try to nail that and then kind of do a separate pass on the actual emotions and make sure that I can see it in my head. And that, quite frankly, if it was on a screen, it would look cool. But it's definitely going through the motions of the actual fight scene at a different pass.
Yeah, I choreograph everything. So I like see my books like movies and then I translate them backwards into books, which is not something I necessarily recommend, but it's because I see everything. And because of that, whether it's a dance scene, an ensemble scene, or a fight scene, I'm choreographing the scene in terms of the movement through it. And I also come from the anime school, which means that like I watched a lot of anime growing up, and anime does fight scenes very, very well because it focuses on the movement and the momentum. And it's not about hitting the technicality of like where somebody put their hand on someone else's wrist. It's about the flow of like, where does the body end up and how do you feel that? And I also was a competitive fencer for 6-7 years nationally, and like so it's all about like just understanding body movement and body articulation. It's something that I love. Fight scenes are among my favorite elements, and as somebody who writes like magic, it's like another component of the fight scene. So for me, I'm just trying to like visualize, and then I went on to write comics, and so I got to see like the direct translation of a fight scene based on like how I envisioned it.
Do you ever like, as you're writing, like, I need to act out to see how this movie works? Like, what is 10 paces?
Yeah. I definitely will like make somebody stand in a position so that I can think about it. But then so I did it really early on. And then what I realized is it wasn't important. Mm-hmm. Like the movement is important. So I stopped after a few years because I realized it doesn't actually matter where my body is in relation to their body. That's not what I'm trying to convey. What I'm trying to convey is like the momentum.
What school of fencing do you like? What style of fencing? Sorry, what?
Epee. So like full head to toe. There's like saber, which is the most pirate, foil, which has the most rules, and then epee.
And what's your favorite anime?
Oh God. See, I grew up on classics like Cowboy Bebop and Trigun, things that were all about power, like being hidden by niceness. And I love everything from like Bleach to My Hero Academia. So I'll probably like Psycho-Pass is probably my favorite right
now. We have a couple questions about what do the two of you think about fan fiction?
Fan fiction is awesome. I used to read fan fiction. I mean, like, it's the whole thing, like, you're not supposed to read it or know about it, but like, I can't tell you as a writer and as somebody who writes fiction and is a creator, how amazing it is to think, wow, I wrote a world that was so exciting to somebody, they want to play in it. That's amazing. Like, I have no words except that's really cool. And I think especially, I'm a big believer in once the books are done, they are done and they belong to the readers because we're quite frankly here because of the readers. And especially like we're living in a pandemic now, like you go play in this world, I like find the joy that you can. Like I'm just honored that people would take that they would use their own heart and soul to play in something that I created.
Yeah, I put fan fiction and fan art in the same category, which is that it's like an incredible gift and a sign of love. Like it feels like a love letter from readers. And so I don't read fan fiction, but I will read the tags because I think that's my favorite part is like getting to see the tags. It's interesting. Yeah, I am always just immensely flattered that it exists because it means that people wanted to spend more time with the characters.
So we are starting to run out of time. So I'm going to ask the two of you if you have any books that you are reading that you're excited about that you might want to hype up, especially new books. And then I'm going to ask you about your upcoming projects. And then I'm going to give you guys some rapid fire questions.
Yeah. I'm reading The Burning God right now, which is the third book in R.F. Kuang series, and loving it. And I just finished The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and it was maybe the like softest gay story I've ever read. Like, it was just the most delightful, wonderful. Like, I didn't want it to end, and then I promptly bought it for both my parents and made them sit down and both read it. So I just think like during a pandemic, it might be the story we need right now.
I'm reading The Invisible Life of Addie, LaRue, and this is one of the things they don't tell you before you become an author, that like you can do events with awesome people and read their stuff earlier. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. But I'm also, in terms of things that are also coming out, Girl, Serpent, Thorn by Melissa Bashardos comes out in July and is fantastic. It's this pre-Islamic Persian fairy tale-esque world that talk about, you know, women who are not necessarily likable. It's fantastic. The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, also awesome and fresh and feminist and scared the heck out of me. There's another one I wanted to shout out that's coming out this summer.
I'm looking forward to both of those. I haven't read either one of them yet.
They're really good. An epic fantasy, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, that's coming out this fall, is freaking phenomenal. I mean, it is it's like you read it and I'm like, I feel like I'm watching my genre expand in ways that are just wonderful. So it's another one I'm going to be like telling everybody to read in the fall.
And do you guys want to talk a little bit about your upcoming projects? Tell us about Addie LaRue. Tell us about Retired Middle-Aged Pirates.
So The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue comes out October 6th. I wrote this book. It took 10 years, 9.5. I don't want to exaggerate. It's about a young woman in 1700s France who makes a deal with the devil to live forever and ends up cursed to be forgotten by everyone she meets. And she is alone and unable to leave a mark for 300 years until she meets a young man in a bookshop in Brooklyn who out of nowhere remembers her name.
My next project is more of a tropical historical adventure fantasy. It takes place in the 13th century, and I pitched it as sort of Ocean's 11 meets Pirates of the Caribbean. I have always had a great fascination for medieval travelogues, and I wanted to write something that filled in the space of sort of the sailors and the criminals and the con men who were forced to ferry about all of these scholars and travelers, and just have it be fun and joyous and speak to this very cosmopolitan and humorous and lively world. So I'm having a lot of fun writing it. It's also, I wanted to write a fantasy that spoke to me as, quite frankly, like a parent and a mother who you can love your family, but also still have ambitions and want to go back out into the world and have those adventures and finding sort of the peace in that. So I'm really having I'm just having fun doing the research, quite frankly, but also writing it is finally starting to get enjoyable.
So I think that we have some time for some rapid fire questions here, if you guys are ready. I guess what I'll do is we'll alternate back and forth. So, and I realize as I look at these now that a lot of these have to do with food. So I was probably hungry when I was writing these questions down. So Shannon, favorite sandwich?
I'm not good. I like cucumbers and like this Egyptian, very salty kind of feta-esque cheese. I like it because it's easy to make and it's very tasty.
Victoria, last movie you loved?
Parasite.
Shannon, last movie you hated?
I have a small child. I can't remember the last time I saw a movie. I can't remember the last time I saw a movie. I'm sorry.
All right. How about what other author's series do you wish you had written?
Oh gosh. Not so much necessarily that I'd written, because I don't like to think about it that way, but N.K. Jemisin, I love all of her books, but her first series is what made me want to be a published fantasy writer, and it's something I always think back to in my head.
All right. Victoria, favorite book that you bought for the cover?
Oh, I can't confess to that. I buy a lot of books for the covers. I'm not gonna lie. I'm in France right now, and this is not a summation of the books I own. This is a summation of the books I have purchased in the time I have been here. Every book. I buy everything for the cover.
Recent book you bought for the cover?
Most recent book I bought for the cover, Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Marina Garcia, but it's also fabulous. I'm like halfway through.
All right, Shannon, do you prefer to swim in an ocean and lake or a pool?
Ocean, not lake. Lakes kind of creep me out.
Lakes do creep you out. Something touches you, it's not supposed to be there. Victoria, what's your third largest irrational fear?
Field mice. No, seriously.
All right, okay. Shannon, go-to karaoke song?
Is this where I confess I've never actually done karaoke?
All right, what's your favorite karaoke song to watch?
To watch this year, like I don't really like. I've never been to karaoke. I'm a very like boring conservative person.
Okay, what is your best fangirl moment when you met an author that you just tried really hard not to squeak? Did you have one?
Oh yes, N.K. Jemisin. Like one of the first events I did, and it was this strange event where we watched Conan the Barbarian, which I had also never seen. So I sat next to her and I was just like too starstruck to speak. And this was also playing. It was a very weird night.
That's amazing. Victoria, who's someone living or dead that you'd like to have coffee or dinner with?
Neil Gaiman. I have had coffee and dinner with him, but I would like another opportunity.
That's even more flattering because that means that you've met him and you'd like more.
Yes. Oh, I mean, it's the only instance of Meet Your Heroes.
Shannon, do you like reading hardcover or paperback books?
Paperback. They're a little easier to hold.
Victoria, what was your favorite thing to research when you're writing? Do you like researching?
Ways to die.
Ways to die. Okay. Oh, Shannon, salty or sweet?
Sweet.
Victoria, what's your favorite music to write to?
Score, like movie scores.
Oh, yes.
Do you guys have playlists that you like? Do you have like fight scene playlists or romantic?
I have one song per character, so I can play that song and get into the character's point of view.
Shannon, cats or dogs?
Cats.
Cats. All right. Do either of you guys have any advice to aspiring authors that you'd like to give out?
You go first.
I try to finish something, which is not like a pressure thing, but I think a lot of people get so obsessed with the first 3 chapters and just keep doing them over and over and over again. And even if it's this drafty outline, it's so much easier to see the full scope of the story once you have a scope, even if it's just a scaffold.
Yeah, to that end, I really highly recommend coming up with an ending, and like not just an ending, but one that you're super excited about reaching, because on good days, it will make you excited, and on bad days it will keep you from quitting because it's a finite amount of space.
We have
that question just joined the earlier question just joined us.
So we had mentioned actually in the you can see the chat start to lose their mind. We had mentioned when we did a brief tech rehearsal that pets are welcome. Shannon, would you like to introduce us to the cat?
This is Ishtar. She was my first pet when I graduated college, and she is a very sweet cat. She's got like the brain this big, but she's enjoying my office life as she sheds all over me right now.
Fantastic. It's exciting to see someone's pets, especially since we can't go out into public now and pet everybody's dogs, on the sidewalk or pet the cats. So that's about it for the end of our event here. Thank you so much to everybody joining us. Thank you to Victoria for joining us in conversation with Shannon. Shannon, thank you for sharing your launch week with us. We are so excited.
For joining me, both of you. This was great.
I'm going to drop one more link into our chat panel here. We do have signed copies available of Empire of Gold. Please go ahead and click that link, purchase a copy. The Gibson's Bookstore events program is sustained by book sales, and the more people who purchase the book, the more publishers are convinced to send authors out on tour. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was lovely to meet the two of you. Thank you so much. This was a great event. It was worldwide. Everybody was very responsive, had a great audience, great questions. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.